All right, ready to dive into something a little freaky? We're talking red dye 40. Yeah, that red dye 40.
Yeah.
The one you see in like everything.
It's true. It's in practically everything.
Yeah, candy and cosmetics.
Mm-hmm.
This episode might make you think twice about that colorful snack.
It very well might. Red dye 40 is the most common synthetic food dye here in the U.S.
Really?
Yeah. And a recent study revealed some findings about its potential impact on our health. Pretty concerning, actually.
Oh, yeah. We're not talking just a little extra sugar here.
Right, yeah.
This study suggests some pretty serious implications for our DNA, our gut health, even our risk of certain cancers.
Precisely. And what makes this study so relevant is that it wasn't just like a petri dish. The researchers used a specific type of mouse prone to developing cancers in the same areas as humans,
Interesting.
particularly a type of colon cancer that's been on the rise in younger people.
Early onset colorectal cancer.
Exactly.
That's alarming. So they were looking for clues about whether red dye 40 might be playing a role in this trend.
Exactly. What they found is that even at levels considered safe for humans, red dye 40 can damage DNA.
Oh, wow.
They saw this both in cells studied in a lab and in the mice.
Hold on. Damaged DNA. That sounds really serious. I mean, DNA is the blueprint of life, right?
Absolutely. And damage to DNA can lead to all sorts of problems, including an increased risk of cancer.
Right.
They even used this technique called the comet assay, which shows you images of broken DNA strands that literally look like comet tails.
Wow. That's a pretty vivid image.
Sure.
So red dye 40 is messing with our DNA at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
But how does that actually translate to changes in our bodies?
Well, that's where the gut microbiome comes in.
The gut microbiome. Seems like everyone's talking about it these days. So how does red dye 40 affect this balance of bacteria?
Well, the study found that a Western diet, high in fat, already makes some significant changes to the gut microbiome, making it less diverse.
Interesting.
What's really interesting is that when they added red dye 40, especially in combination with a high-fat diet, those changes were amplified. Certain beneficial bacteria decreased, and some potentially harmful ones increased.
So it's like
So, yeah.
red dye 40 is like a silent accomplice to the high-fat diet, making things even worse for our gut. But how does a messed up microbiome contribute to colon cancer?
That's a great question. The researchers believe that the link lies in inflammation.
Okay.
They found that red dye 40, particularly when paired with a high-fat diet, led to significant inflammation in the colons of the mice. And we know that chronic inflammation is a major risk factor for many types of cancer, including colon cancer.
Okay, so we've got DNA damage, gut dysbiosis, and now inflammation. Starting to sound like a pretty convincing case, but didn't you say the mice didn't actually develop cancer?
That's right. The study didn't go as far as inducing full-blown cancer in the mice, but what's concerning is that they found several early warning signs, including these abnormal growths in the colon lining called foci.
Foci.
They're not cancerous yet, but they can be an indication that things are moving in that direction.
So these foci are like
Yeah.
precancerous changes.
Exactly. And they found that both the number and size of these foci increased significantly in the mice that were consuming red dye 40, especially when combined with a high-fat diet.
Okay, so even though the mice didn't actually get cancer, these findings suggest that red dye 40 might be setting the stage for it,
Potentially.
especially in people who are already eating a diet high in fat.
Right.
That's a key takeaway.
Absolutely.
And what's even more concerning is that red dye 40 wasn't just impacting the colon locally, it appears to have had a systemic effect on the whole body.
Right.
Systemic, you mean it wasn't just affecting their gut?
Correct. They found evidence that red dye 40 was increasing inflammation throughout the body.
Wow.
They measured this by looking at a marker of inflammation in the blood called IL-6, and it was significantly higher in the mice that were consuming red dye 40.
So it's not just our guts, but potentially our whole system.
Okay.
It's a lot to digest before we go any further. I think we need to take a closer look at exactly what they found in the colons of these mice.
Yeah, let's zoom in on that. Absolutely. Let's take a closer look at what was happening in those colons. Remember, the researchers were using these special mice that are prone to colon cancers in the same areas as humans with early onset colorectal cancer.
All right, the AJ mice is kind of spooky how they mirrored the human situation. So what exactly did they find?
Well, they focused on two main areas of the colon, the proximal colon, which is the first part, and the distal colon, which is closer to the rectum. And they found that red dye 40, especially in combination with that high-fat diet, led to a significant increase in those precancerous growths we were talking about, the foci in the distal colon.
The distal colon, isn't that the area that's most often affected by early onset colorectal cancer in humans?
Precisely, and that's why this finding is so concerning. It suggests that red dye 40 could be contributing to the development of this type of cancer, particularly in people who are consuming a lot of processed foods that are high in both fat and red dye 40.
Okay, so we're seeing this link between red dye 40 high-fat diets and these precancerous changes in the colon, but it sounds like inflammation is the real culprit here.
It really does seem to be the key. The researchers found clear evidence of increased inflammation in the colons of the mice that were consuming red dye 40, especially those on the high-fat diet.
How did they actually measure inflammation? Did they just look at the colon and say, yep, that looks inflamed?
It was much more scientific than that. They had a pathologist examine the colon tissue under a microscope and assess the level of inflammation based on specific criteria. They also looked at certain molecules that are known to be markers of inflammation. One of them is called INOS, which basically signals that inflammation is happening.
INOS, got it. So they found higher levels of this INOS molecule in the mice that were consuming red dye 40.
Exactly, especially in those on the high-fat diet. And remember, we were talking earlier about how the gut microbiome can influence inflammation? Well, they also found evidence to support that connection in this study.
All right, so it's like a domino effect. The red dye 40 and the high-fat diet disrupt the balance of bacteria in the gut. This leads to increased inflammation, not just in the gut, but potentially throughout the body. And we know that chronic inflammation is a major risk factor for cancer.
That's a great summary. It really highlights how these seemingly isolated factors are actually interconnected and can have a significant impact on our overall health.
It makes you wonder if there are other factors that might be playing a role here, things that could make some people more susceptible to the negative effects of red dye 40 than others. Are there any clues about that in the research?
There is one finding that really stands out. Remember that gene we talked about earlier, P53, which acts like a tumor suppressor, helping to protect our cells from becoming cancerous?
Yeah, P53, it's like our internal bodyguard against cancer.
Well, they found some pretty disturbing evidence that red dye 40 could actually be interfering with P53's ability to do its job.
Wait, seriously, how did they figure that out?
They used a cutting-edge technique called organoid culture to grow miniature versions of the mice's colons in a lab.
Miniature colons, that's incredible.
It is, and it allowed them to study the effects of red dye 40 on the colon cells in a more controlled environment. And what they discovered is that red dye 40 was actually causing mutations in the P53 gene.
Mutations, so it was basically damaging this crucial gene that helps to protect us from cancer.
That's right. And without P53 functioning properly, our cells are much more vulnerable to becoming cancerous.
This is getting scary, but I'm guessing there's a catch here, right? Because not everyone who consumes red dye 40 develops cancer.
You're right, and that's where this gets even more interesting. They found that these P53 mutations were much more likely to occur in the mice that were also eating a high-fat diet.
Okay, so it's that combination, again, red dye 40 plus a high-fat diet seems to be a recipe for trouble. But help me understand this. If these mutations were happening in mice, does that mean the same thing is happening in humans?
It's important to remember that mice aren't humans, however. This finding could help explain why we're seeing an increase in early onset colorectal cancer in people who consume a lot of processed foods high in both fat and red dye 40.
So it's possible that this combination is weakening our defenses against cancer by interfering with our P53 gene.
That's the theory, of course. More research is needed to confirm this in humans. But this study definitely raises some serious questions about the safety of red dye 40, especially given how prevalent it is in our food supply.
It's pretty unsettling to think that something as seemingly innocuous as a food coloring could have such a profound impact on our health. I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this. Is there any good news here, or is it all doom and gloom?
I know, right? It can be a bit daunting when we see what might be lurking in our food.
So what can we do with this information? Should we all be swearing off red dye 40 completely?
I wouldn't say it has to be all or nothing. Remember, this is just one study.
Right.
More research is needed.
Of course. But in the meantime, is it worth being more mindful about how much red dye 40 we're consuming?
Absolutely, yeah. Even small changes can make a difference.
Okay.
And a good place to start is by simply reading labels.
Oh, yeah.
You'd be surprised how many products contain red dye 40. Yeah.
Even things you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, I remember being shocked when I saw it on a jar of pickles.
It's in so many processed foods.
Yeah.
So reading labels is a great first step.
Okay.
Another simple change is to focus on eating more whole, unprocessed foods.
Back to the basics.
Fruits, vegetables, whole grains.
Those are your friends.
Those are the good guys.
What about those times when you just can't resist that brightly colored snack? Is it okay to indulge every now and then?
Yeah, moderation is key. As with most things in life, an occasional treat probably isn't going to make or break your health, especially if you're generally eating a balanced diet.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance.
So we don't need to live in fear of red dye 40, but we should definitely be aware of it and make conscious choices about how much we're consuming.
Exactly. And remember, the research is ongoing.
Right.
We'll definitely keep you updated. That's great.
Yeah.
It's reassuring to know that scientists are on this case. Makes you realize how much there still is to discover about the things we put into our bodies.
It really is fascinating, isn't it?
All right, well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into Red Dye 40.
It's been a journey.
It's been an adventure. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay healthy.